The first step to take off the console and remove the factory shifter is to go ahead and get the car prepped. You want to put the car in neutral and pull the emergency brake up. And the first thing we want to do is we're going to take off the factory C5 shift knob. This factory C5 shift knob comes off by just removing the little top insert, and I'm going to use one of the large prying screwdrivers, but probably use a little bit smaller one, and you just want to pry it up lightly just to get your finger under it, and then you'll see this little shift knob insert pops out, and it's just pressed in. Okay, once that's taken out, set that aside, and you will notice that the shift knob has what we have been referring to as the demon key. It's a T-shaped slot that goes into a groove in the metal shaft that goes down inside of the shifter. That's how the knob is attached. So we'll pull that back into fourth gear so we can access it, and you want to take, like I said, these two large flat blades, and you just want to put one underneath one tab and one underneath the other tab, and just carefully, very slowly, carefully pry up, and it'll come right out, and then you pull it out and set it aside. Once the demon key is pulled out, the knob will unscrew right off the shifter, and at that time we want to go ahead and just put it back into neutral. Okay, after the shift knob is removed, this is an optional step, but I just like to do it because it just it's a little easier to manipulate the console when you remove it. I go ahead on a C5. You can actually take out the center boot just by pulling carefully around the outside, and you'll see it has tabs all the way around that just when you put it in, they just snap into place. So you pull that off carefully, and you can set that aside. That way when you're pulling the console up, the boot's not fighting you. And I do go ahead and put it in fourth gear as well, because when you're pulling the console up, it's just a little easier to manipulate. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the forward attachment screws, and there's one under this panel, and inside the ashtray there are actually two of them, and you remove the ashtray just by pulling it out, setting it aside, and you'll see there's one there, and if you can see down inside there, there's one down in here. And then using a little tiny flat blade screwdriver, be very careful so you don't scratch your dash, we're going to just very lightly pop this underneath this little cover, and it'll pop that little bracket. It just has two little tabs there, and it just snaps right out. Set that aside, and there's the third screw. Now one of the things you need to do is take your steering wheel, and you want to have it all the way up as far as it can possibly go, because this entire console piece is one piece, and when you take it off it requires some manipulation, and it's a very tight squeeze to get this thing up over the shift knob, clear the steering wheel and everything. So using the 15 Torx, we'll go ahead and remove those three screws, starting with this one. And make sure you do not lose these screws, because obviously they will be reused. So we'll set them right on the table. Move this one in here. And these three screws are identical in length, so you do not need to worry about putting them in the correct spots. Either one of them will fit any of the three holes. Just make sure you don't drop them. And I go ahead and just also remove the cigarette lighter just to get it out of the way as well. Okay, once we remove the fasteners in the front of the console, we're going to remove the fasteners in the rear of the console, which actually is two steps. We'll open up the center glove box, and you'll notice that there is a split between the front half and the back half. We actually need to remove the mounting bolts, or actually they're mounting nuts back here, and slide this part of the console up just enough to remove the front part of the console up and out of the car. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to remove the little covers here, and if you can't pop them off with your fingernails, you can use that same little flat blade screwdriver that we did to remove the covers in the front. And then we are going to take the 10mm socket and remove the 2 hex nuts in the rear of the console. And you can just lay this stuff inside the center glove box because we're not going to be removing this completely. Okay. After you remove the 2 nuts in the rear of the center console, we're going to pop this little tombstone shaped cover up, and you just want to get a small little flat blade up and just pry it up carefully so you don't scratch it or break the tabs, and they're held on with these large metal tabs. And you'll see that we've got a bunch of connectors here. Now, we do not need to disconnect the passenger airbag light or the active handling button. We can leave those connected, but we will need to disconnect the cigarette lighter, and we need to make sure that when we connect this back that our fuel door still works. So one of the things we'll do when we put it all back together before you close everything up is you'll just hit that button and make sure that your fuel door activates. So the first thing we will do is we will push in with a little screwdriver on the little tab here and disconnect the cigarette lighter, and then this whole unit you can actually just have hang over to the side just for a bit like that. And that will give us room to remove the same size hex nuts that were in the rear with our 10mm socket. And just be careful when you do this that you don't drop them down inside the tunnel either. Okay, once we have these 2 nuts removed, this entire back half of the console is completely free from the car. The only exception is the gas tank removal switch, which we're going to go ahead and pull this thing back, and we're going to put our hand up underneath here, and we are going to pop that loose. And then once I pop it loose, I'm going to close this up, pull this thing off, and I'll flip it upside down so you can see what we've done here. This is your gas tank activator, and there's the plug, and it just goes inside there and snaps into place. Now, there's not a lot of wire, so be careful when you pull up on this plug to get your hand in there. It may just unplug itself, but you need to make sure before you tighten up all the console pieces that your gas cap door is working. So we're going to go ahead and remove this piece from the vehicle, or at least set it over to the side. Now, you don't have to go through that extent. You can just slide it up out of the way, but it's just a little easier to see everything going on with it completely removed. Once it's removed, we can go ahead and put this centerpiece. I'm just going to snap it in place just to keep it from falling everywhere. And then we are going to slowly manipulate the center console up. Okay, once the console's out of the way, we're going to go ahead and remove the shifter dust boot cover. And it's the same 10mm socket that we used to take the mounting nuts off of the outer consoles. So you just want to remove these 4 bolt nuts and make sure that you do not let them drop down inside the console either. Okay, and the boot just lifts right up off of the shifter like that. Okay, now we're going to remove the factory shifter, so we're going to go ahead and pop it in neutral. And again, same 10mm socket. Now these are actually 1/4 bolts, so a 10mm is not an accurate socket, but it does work because we're not going to be getting that tight on here. But I believe they are 3/8 is the imperial size. And this is where you need to be very careful not to drop one of these screws down inside the tunnel, because it's pretty deep down there and you'd have to get a magnetic. Alright, once you have the 4 bolts removed, you just wiggle and pull up on the shifter to remove it, and then you just want to peel this little foam gasket off and discard it. There's really no reason to clean this with a razor blade. It's actually not a top loader style transmission shifter, so there's no fluid in here. It's a linkage style. So this is more of a vibration type of gasket.